Clap. In my novel, Caught, there are two young men who decide to go down the Pacific coast of Canada and bring back, it's set in 1978, and they bring back the largest amount of pot, marijuana, ever imported into Canada. Back in 1978, it was a huge thing for these young Newfoundland men to decide to do, because they would make a tremendous amount of money if they were able to do it. However, and the story is based on true stories set in Newfoundland, and the thing was that in this particular story, there was new technology, and that technology was a satellite, which was brand spanking new for the RCMP, the police force, and they were able to, with this technology, follow those young men all the way down the coast to Colombia and back again and catch them. And for me, the end of the 70s was the end of a time of innocence, when there was suddenly like a burgeoning technology in surveillance, and it meant that we are all being watched. I think with that, in the novel anyway, we see that moment when innocence is lost, when the freedom from knowledge that Eden is a metaphor for is bashed, and we're cast out of heaven and become aware of ourselves in the way that Adam and Eve did, aware of our nakedness, aware that we are constantly being surveyed. The story of Caught really had a kind of folkloric quality. These guys were folk heroes who tried to do this. I think they were considered debonair, they were handsome, they were wild, they were willing to, just go for the gusto. But Caught has been made into a television series. And one of the things that I struggled with in creating Caught was, how do I capture the 70s? And the thing about the 70s is that it was a moment when people were after freedom. They wanted freedom in their lives, and they were willing to just go for it. And also, of course, they had those wild psychedelic clothes. And the idea of marijuana at that time, I think, was it was supposed to open the mind. People thought it would open the mind, open the doors of perception. And when I saw the television series, I've seen the first 2 episodes, and I saw all the conventions of films from the 70s, I realized, oh, of course, I grew up in the 70s, I was affected by those images. They did things like splitting the screen. I split, point of view. They did things like, wild flashing lights, psychedelic colors. I write that way. So I was definitely affected by that just saturated in that beautiful Polaroid color. I wrote a book called February, which was about the loss of the Ocean Ranger, which was an oil rig that sank off the coast of Newfoundland in 1982, and all 84 men on board died. At the same time, when I was 16, my father died. And he and my mother were madly in love, and he was a great father. And so I understood what it meant to lose somebody that you love and love deeply, and I was understanding what grief was. So I think I brought to the writing of that novel an exploration of grief that had to do with my own personal experience. But it was really about a political world of the economics of oil extraction, of fossil fuels, of what it means to sacrifice the safety of men and women who work on the ocean for profit. I went to the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, and at the time, the college had been working with conceptual art. And conceptual art was about creating a work of art that could not be bought or sold. In fact, it circumnavigated the market because it was often ephemeral, or it was so long in duration that you couldn't contain it so that you could create a product. So for instance, in my young adult novel, Flannery, the mom is a conceptual artist, and she creates ice sculptures of polar bears. But these statues could not be sold because they melt. So I think that training about art and about the idea of buying and selling art very much affected the subject matter that I ended up writing about, because I was interested in what it means to tell a story that can't be owned in any way. But I also paint and draw, and I think that when you paint and draw, if you are trying to draw from life, you look so intently and so carefully at what you're drawing that you see in a new way. So we all have assumptions in our head about what we're seeing, but when you are forced to really comprehend what you're seeing, you recognize those false assumptions. And for me, that's a big part of writing, is trying to recognize what is before me.